Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. My name is Bianca Sanos. I'm the director of the Institute for Advanced Study and Distinguished McKnight University Professor of American Studies. For access purposes, I'm a brown-skinned woman with dark hair, and I'm wearing dark glasses and a black dress. The University of Minnesota Injustice Series brings together scholars, artists, and community leaders to discuss the most pressing issues of our time. Over the next several years, our featured guests will share how they are approaching today's problems, explore their own visions of what justice might look like, and together we hope to gain a better understanding of how to build a better future and a more just world. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome the Humanities Futures Fellows who are here with us today. Please note that after the Q&A, all the students should go to gather in the hall right outside these doors and wait there for the folks who will be guiding you to the next event. We're very excited to welcome you to Everything is Connected, Indigenous Ecological Knowledge and Practices. Today's event is also presented in partnership with Open Rivers, Rethinking Water, Place, and Community, and the Mellon-funded Environmental Stewardship, Place, and Community Initiative. We're also grateful to our co-sponsors, the Departments of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and the University of Minnesota Duluth, and the Department of American Studies, Department of History, and CLA Public Engagement. All IAS public events, including this one, include professional captioning. You can view captions by clicking the stream text link shared via the chat or by clicking the Show Captions button in Zoom's menu. We will be using Slido to facilitate our audience Q&A today. So when it's time for Q&A, we'll display a QR code on the screen. Alternatively, you can also use your smartphone by going to www.slido.com and enter the code #IASUMN. Please note that questions can be submitted anonymously and that in order to respond to as many questions as possible, we may occasionally combine related questions. My next step in welcoming you today is to remind us that wherever you are joining us from today, that you are on native land. I'm speaking from the ancestral and contemporary lands of Dakota people. I would also like to remind us that the University of Minnesota was not only built on unceded Dakota land, but built with the profits from selling thousands of acres of Dakota and Anishinaabe land. At the IAS, we see the work of supporting communities of color as inseparable from supporting our Indigenous relatives and colleagues. So toward that end, it's important to acknowledge and denounce historic and contemporary forms of racial injustice in the city where we live and work as well. So I begin by standing in solidarity with the families of George Floyd, Dante Wright, Jamar Clark, and Philando Castile, as well as many others who've lost loved ones to police violence here in Minnesota. As a scholar whose work critically examines racial injustice, I acknowledge and affirm the sovereignty of Indigenous nations while advancing the IAS's commitment to building an anti-racist and inclusive university that disavows white supremacy and racism. As you join us at future Injustice Series events, I hope you'll see how these conversations act as just one way that we've committed to working alongside our relatives to dismantling systems that harm our communities and to building a just university together. And now, without further delay, I'm very pleased to introduce today's guests. Clint Carroll is Associate Professor of Ethnic Studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. A citizen of the Cherokee Nation, he works closely with Cherokee people in Oklahoma on issues of land conservation and the perpetuation of land-based knowledge and ways of life. He's the author of Roots of Our Renewal, Ethnobotany and Cherokee Environmental Governance, published at the University of Minnesota Press. He currently co-edits the Cambridge University Press series, Elements in Indigenous Environmental Research, and serves on the editorial boards for Cultural Anthropology and Environment and Society. Wendy Todd is Alaska Native Haida, PhD. Dr. Todd is a Dr. Howard Highholt Endowed Professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth with an appointment in American Indian Studies and Earth and Environmental Sciences. She is an oceanographer and environmental scientist focusing on examining microbial molecular diversity, biogeochemistry, and biomineralization of groundwater. She founded the Indigenous Geoscience Community, a community of Indigenous geoscientists who come together to share cross-cultural knowledge, and is co-founder of the Indigenous Women's Water Sisterhood to provide knowledge to the importance of water and Indigenous women's roles as water protectors. And finally, our moderator for today is Mona Smith. Mona Smith, Sisseton Wahpeton, Dakota, is a multimedia artist and educator and co-founder of Allies Media /Art and the Healing Place Collaborative. Her media work includes art projects for the web and multimedia installation work, most notably the Bede-Makaska Public Art Collaboration, the Bedota Memory Map with the Minnesota Humanities Center, and the Multimedia Dakota Welcome Installation for Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists Exhibition at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Her artistic and educational work uses image, sound, and place to work between the place of healing, of relationship, of meaning, where spirit and physical, life and death, fear and strength, night and day intersect. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome. Mona, the stage is yours.
I was asked to be a moderator, and I will tell you right off the bat that I've never been known for being moderate. And I will also tell you that I haven't a clue what a moderator does. I watched them, but I have never been one. So my instinct is to say, can you two tell us more about your work? Turn it right over to
Okay. I'm waiting for my slide. Anybody? All right. Well, I'll start speaking in Hodkill to introduce myself formally, and start by saying how adangat kolagan to the people of this place and of this land, to allow me space to share my language and culture on your lands. Hadalas, at untis ontigudelagen, gust akaskusturi alagen, sanat las dastis onai hatayo de ejum, di hadas hatai hatagen, di klingwai klakia la awayagen, Skáahluwáa Todd, Wendy Todd, Jatsai Kith Nudekyong, Donna Douglas di Al Uijung, Alec and Ruth di Chin di Nanu Ijung, James, Annie di Chin di Nanu Ijung, Sonahut, Kate di Chin di Nanu Ijung, Hikta Handalized with Ijung. So good people, I'm happy to be here with you today. My mind is in a good place to be here with you. I'm of the Haida Nation, of the Skáahluwáa Fish Egg Clan. I wear the sculpin, and I'm eagle. I said in Hodkill, I am an observer of the world, or I'm a Haida scientist. I find it important to tie that into my introduction because on our journeys through academia, we feel like we have to strip away part of who we are. And once we get through wherever that is we're going, we reintegrate. And I want to encourage you to maintain the duality and celebrate the duality of your identity as an Indigenous scholar. My Haida name is Skáahluwáa, meaning laughing while precisely doing something. So basically they knew I was OCD and I laugh a lot. So I was like, okay, that's great. My given name is Wendy Todd, and I told you who my family was because I represent not only my family but my nation. And my mother's Donna Douglas, my grandparents are Alec and Ruth, my great-grandparents are James and Annie, and my great-great-great-grandparents are Sonahut and Kate. And my first slide, so in this image, the top two in black and white, those are my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. And on the bottom is that awesome 13-year-old me with that awesome haircut from the village. I'm from a village of 350 people. And when I look at that version of me never imagined what she would be. She never imagined she would leave Alaska. She never imagined she'd go to college. And now, these are the different parts of who I am. I'm an oceanographer. I'm a knowledge bearer. I'm learning my language, rediscovering my culture and who I am. I'm part of the Indigenous Women's Water Sisterhood here in Minnesota. I'm a climate activist. And most importantly, I'm a mentor to the youth in our community. Next slide, please. So I want to start with grounding us, because when I share, I view this as I'm sharing, we're in ceremony together. I'm sharing parts of who I am with you. You may not agree with what I say, and that's okay. We have to learn to be okay with not agreeing with one another. But I will respectfully talk to you, and I ask you to do the same when we have Q&A, okay? So part of that cultural responsibility, Klaga, is honoring the spaces that we occupy in the land, knowing that we are integrated. What we do to the land and air and water, it does to us. So respecting that, thanking it for giving to us every day. Next. Dagwias, strength of body, mind, and spirit. Caring for our families, our communities, and our clans. Next. Honoring our ancestors and future generations, knowing that what we do today impacts those that are coming before us, even those that we're never going to meet. So what is our responsibility to making sure the spaces that they come into after we're gone is still there for them? Next. And social and spiritual balance. So ensuring social and spiritual harmony. And I think of that as how we engage with one another. The talk is called Everything is Connected, and it's Aji, Wadluwanu, Dudal Kwagan. Everything is connected. Next slide. So this is Hringwai Klakiela Awiagan, an observer of the world. So on there's a red cedar, and I think of science as we always have a problem or a question or a hypothesis, something we're trying to solve, right? And if I asked you, what would you do with this red cedar log? It's just dropped off right there. And people will say, I'll build a fence, I'll build a house, I'll build furniture, everything that keeps you where you are, because that's your worldview. I know what to do with this in this worldview. But you bring in another culture, another worldview, and they're going to build a canoe, and they're going to get you where you need to go. And that's the beauty of diversity, of our differences in worldviews and knowledge systems. So I like to think of it this way. How does it enrich what we're trying to solve every day as scientists? Next. So cross-cultural knowledge systems. So on the image there, if we start in the middle looking at traditional knowledge systems, that's woven cedar bark. And when we talk about traditional knowledge, I love this because every plate, every square in there is a different knowledge. Chemistry, physics, social science, engineering, material science. So when we share a story, all of that is in there. When we talk about a story of doing or a place to go, we're considering all of those things at the same time. Spirituality and our connection to place. And those are governed by protocols and practices, spirituality, worldviews of our communities that we come from. And they vary across community. When we move into the outer ring, academia, Western knowledge, we hear a lot about pure science. Everything's disconnected and siloed, but it's not really. So I made all these rings to attach to one another, because if we're in biology, and we're in microbiology, which is what I love, we have to grow bacteria. Well, what do we need to know to grow bacteria? We have to know chemistry. So we're bringing in a worldview, another science discipline that we know. We're bringing in material science to see what the bacteria are going to grow on. Bring in physics. It's not a pure science. We're taking what we know from another discipline and using it in our discipline. So I connected all of these together. And that, in academia, has a culture as well. Protocols and practices, worldviews, laws and rules of how we conduct ourselves in those spaces. So as a student, when we're starting at the middle and we learn the outer part, we're learning to think two different ways. It's called two-eyed seeing. It's a bidirectional knowledge pathway. And the students on the outside that grew up in that worldview learn an integrated way of seeing the world, cause and effect, okay? So it benefits all of us to see the world this way, because we can see what our science is doing, these little pieces. We look at the little pieces to the whole, okay? And that builds critical thinking, not just checking a box, but what is really going to happen if I do this, all right? It's a different way of thinking, right? Academia rewards you on memory, saying the right thing at the right time, right? Next. So an example, these are water molecules. So we would find that in chemistry, right? H2O. So we're looking at a piece, we're looking at water. Collectively, next image, that makes our watershed, okay? So we're looking at, when we're looking at the water cycle, we're looking at transfer of nutrients around the planet, transfer of energy around the planet. What drives, we live in water, right? We're born in water, we're created in water, and we live in water vapor. So collectively, we're looking at a watershed. We want to know what's happening in that watershed. There's chemistry going on in there, right? Depending on the rocks that are there, if there's a river running in, what is coming into this system. So we start looking at other parts. Next. And then looking at food systems. How does that water and what's in that water impact food security and food sovereignty? All right? So if I'm looking at sea cucumbers, which is what's in this image, and I want to know why they're disappearing, I'm going to look at the water chemistry. But I also want to know how long have people been using them. Next. And so I tie into the community and I start asking questions. And you get historical information on that ecosystem and what's there, what's been there, and how has it changed over decades. And so that enriches our science, being able to see it in two different ways, because we're getting that historical knowledge that impacts the science we do today. All right, next. So I like to tie in indigenous concepts in science because we don't think of these, we're not trained to think of these in academia. The idea of animacy, what is that? So an example of that, if you've ever seen a mushroom growth cycle, you see a little cycle and you see it growing underground and then it comes up and you have a fruiting body. There's no term to talk about what's happening when that pops through the ground. In Anishinaabe, it's papoi, the energy or life force to push through the ground. But what is that? That's biochemistry. There's biochemical reactions happening in that organism to push it through the ground. But there's no English term to describe that. So now we're tying in language and we're tying in these concepts that everything is animate, right? Beinghood. There's a tribe in, I think, Oklahoma that gave beinghood to a river running through their lands. So now if the water's contaminated upstream, they can act on behalf of that river for contaminating it. Humility. Has anyone taken a class on humility? Mm-mm. It's know it and act like you know it and never say you don't know. Stewardship versus caretaker. Are we stewards of something or are we the caretakers? And there's a lot of confusion around stewardship because what we mean when we talk about it in my classes when I'm talking to Native students is they're talking about a caretaker, but stewardship is dominion over. And we don't have dominion over. We are part of this ecosystem. We're the caretakers of it because when we take care of it, it takes care of us, right? Relationality, how are we related to everything? Reciprocity, respect. Respect for one another, respect for the spaces we occupy, respect for what we do every day in our lives, because it always comes back. Cultural responsibility. We move along a spectrum. I know at a time there's cultural responsibility versus Western expectation. Wow. Untenured faculty, what do? I get in trouble a lot, and that's okay. Because my cultural responsibility is more important to me than that academic expectation. But that took time. As students, we don't have that luxury. So find an advocate to help you and advocate for you. All right? And you can always reach out to, I think, any of us to do that for you. But that is so important. It's part of who we are. And sometimes we go into classes that go against that. And it's really hard to balance that. But know that it's okay. It's okay to ask for help and to get an advocate to help you through that. And then individuality versus community. We're supposed to publish, be number one, and do it on our own. Our worldview says we do with a community, right? We do in collaboration with. So it's two worldviews. We're constantly being pulled between these two worldviews. And it can leave us feeling unbalanced and uncentered. So going back to those core cultural values to center ourselves every day is the way I have gotten through academia and how I manage every day. Next slide. So putting principles and protocols into practice. These are various programs that I run. I have an Indigenous RU, Geoscience and Policy. So the students use their Western science, whatever they're interested in with a mentor. They also have to have a cultural mentor. The mentors give them 1 day a week to do cultural activities, harvest, whatever they need to do. They also learn policy. Anytime we're working with our communities, we're engaging in policy, right? Voices is a project to work with faculty, industry, and funding agencies on how to engage with our people in a respectful way, how to work with us and not on us. We're not here to build anybody's career, right? Diversity is a big business. We're not a business. We're human beings. SYNC is a project that just started working with high school. Again, tying traditional knowledge into Western science, tying our language in and reclaiming who students are earlier, right? And then the Indigenous geoscience community, and that's bringing geoscientists together from around the globe to come together in a safe space and talk about our knowledges and share with respect, reciprocity, understanding, and love. The Indigenous Women's Water Sisterhood, we work on that up in Duluth. We've reclaimed space on the waterfront to build a ceremony site. We've published a 5th grade water book curriculum, and we just published a protocol and practices for researchers working on the lake and how to engage with tribes. So in a nutshell, that's some of the work that I do. Can you go back a couple slides? Right there. Oh, so this image, I don't know if you noticed, is an indigenized version of the cover for this. So that mural is on the side of the Graduate Hotel in Seattle. There's an artist her name's Amanda, and she says a long last name because it's impossible to say her last name. And she interviewed women of color and diverse backgrounds in science. And she painted murals all across the United States. And she didn't have a native. And so a colleague of mine put her in touch with me. And at first I was a little skeptical. Seems kind of weird, someone wants to paint your work. And so we did a couple interviews and she started painting this. This is Haida women. We're a matriarchal society. If you notice, their hands are all pointing in a circle, showing the cyclical nature and the connection of air, land, and water. And we unveiled this a couple years ago in Seattle, and I wanted to make sure that she reflected different hair colors, different skin colors, and different eye colors. Okay? The way we look doesn't determine if we're Native or not. Where I live doesn't determine whether I'm Native or not. So I wanted her to reflect that. And this is showing our traditional knowledge systems from a Haida perspective. And my daughter indigenized this one. So this is what we're going to put this one up in Alaska. And it was amazing because we were able to I didn't get through my PhD program and do the work I do on my own. My tribe supported every step of the way. And without them, I wouldn't be where I am today. So we brought 50 people down, elders and youth, to unveil this. So we're publicly holding space with traditional knowledge through art. That's our traditional way of communicating, right? Oral traditions, arts. So it's up there, publicly disseminated in a positive way. There's no deficit language tied to it. It's only qualitative. It's not real. This is real. It's sustained us for 10,000 years. So it's holding public space and our language. We only have 5 people fluently speaking our language. So we were able to put this up in Seattle. Aji, Wadluwanu, Dudal, Quag, and everything is connected. We brought our elders down and our youth. And my hope was that we had a space to acknowledge what they went through in boarding school. All right, we're changing what education is because it's been trauma, right? It's been trauma. Fear of language, fear of our culture, fear of how we look, It's trauma. So I wanted to bring education to our elders in a different way. And our youth to be able to hold on to who they are and be proud of it. So this bi-directional way of sharing what our elders went through and what our youth are going through. And it was really fantastic to be able to have everyone there and to do ceremony and be singing downtown Seattle, singing our songs, and celebrating our knowledge, being out there and showing it in a positive way and not a negative way. So with that, I'll say, how adangat kolag, and thank you for allowing me to share with you.
Hello, Wendy. Really grateful to you, Wendy, for laying such a wonderful foundation for this conversation and sharing your work and everything about yourself that you shared. Osio nigadawo, ukahate sikwanio hadawado. Stevie Carroll, agi do dale, Robin York, agiji. De la sina dagi, digega wata sano. No wu, kalawadi, jundes kwasti, wigalan la dia, dagi laustaneho, ale aniya wia di des kwasti, degadeo haskoi. Ahan Dakota, Gadohi, Unajeli, Galieli ga jide do ako higa. Hello, everyone. I introduced myself and I told you my Cherokee name and my parents' names and where I grew up. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, away from community. I also told you where I work and what I teach. As Dr. Castellanos said, I teach American Indian Studies in the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I also just acknowledged our Dakota relatives of this land and said that I'm grateful that we're all here today. So thank you for having me, and I'm really just honored to be in this space and in conversation with Wendy and Mona. I'll tell you a little bit about what I do and why I do it and how I came to this work. And I'll go ahead and just ask for the first slide. There we go. So what I want to focus on today, so I'm, as I said, grew up in Texas. I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen. Family's originally from around Muskogee and between Muskogee and Weber's Falls, if any of you know that area. That's where our family land still is. And relatives, cousins of mine, helped to maintain our former allotment land. And what brought me to this work really is a kind of a winding road story through higher education, dropping out of higher education, going into community college, finding some direction, and heading to the University of Arizona, where I was very fortunate to work with some folks in the American Indian Studies program there, as well as the Applied Anthropology Department, or Bureau of Applied Research and Anthropology. And I learned a lot of things that made me want to go back home and reconnect with community and family, and apply that research experience and approach to research from a community-based perspective, specifically regarding environmental issues. And so I showed up after being very persistent with a contact that I had there who has continued to be an auntie and a really amazing mentor who stuck her neck out for me. Her name is Nancy John. She's Choctaw and Creek. She's worked for the Cherokee Nation Environmental Services Department for, countless years, and is still there. And she noted my persistence and passion for getting involved and wanting to do quite literally any kind of grunt work they would put me on in environmental services there. What she actually asked me to do was something much more daunting, but also an amazing opportunity for a young person just about to enter graduate school. And the process of, and that was back in 2004, the process of developing a project for that tribal department is really the foundation on which I want to share the work that I'm doing most recently today. That work entailed and this is where a lot of my dissertation research as a graduate student focused on. It entailed trying to find a way to bring traditional knowledge into the everyday operations of a tribal department that was nonetheless set up to do things according to a Western way of thinking. And as wonderful of a job that folks were doing, Nancy knew that there were some things that were missing from that picture. How do we think about in this case, what she had me work on, how do we think about the plants that we see as medicine, as food, as material for crafts and other tools in the type of operations that the Environmental Services Department was set up to do, which operates very much like the US EPA, but a Cherokee Nation version of that. So for example, when the Roads Department of our tribal nation contacts the Environmental Services Department and says, we're planning on building a new road through one of our Cherokee communities, do you know of any plants that are in this corridor that might be affected? There was little information that they had other than their individual knowledge to point to help kind of guide that question or guide the answer to that question. So here comes a very green young future graduate student, and as I said, it was a very daunting task, but my task was to design a database that was really going to act as a resource for these types of answers and questions. But the first thing that I did was ask, can I go and talk to people as opposed to start work on the computer? And that was what really began the journey for me of reconnecting not only with family, but with elders and knowledge keepers in the community, and really trying to establish a sense of trust and relationship with those people, and asking about things that, quite frankly, at that time and to a degree today, weren't openly discussed, specifically plant medicine. And so over the course of 4+ years, I kept going back during the summer as I was going to grad school, and iteratively built, in partnership with elders and knowledge keepers and staff like Nancy at the Environmental Services Department, a program that was designed to answer those questions. But what came out of that more significantly was the development and the establishment of a group called the Cherokee Nation Medicine Keepers. And I've, in a humble way, acted as a facilitator for their efforts since their formation in 2008. And I've been very privileged and blessed to work with them, and I continue to work with them on, most recently, the Cherokee Environmental Leadership Program. And I know I must be skipping over quite a lot, but to try and be brief and to kind of segue into this project specifically, this was the culmination of something that they had been wanting to put their efforts into for quite some time, but only recently we were able to fund and develop as a result of that partnership. And so this is a land education program on the Cherokee Reservation in northeastern Oklahoma. And we devised it in partnership. We designed the curriculum based on the elders' perspectives on how to think about an educational program, what we might call an environmental educational program that pushed back against some of the experiences that they have had and had during their time in educational systems like boarding schools. And so next slide. So we started off with taking to heart our elders' perspectives on our relationship to place. And I'll show you in a bit, as many of you might already know, Cherokees, at least Cherokees in Oklahoma, live where they do as a product of forced relocation. So this quote by our elder and spiritual leader, Crosland Smith, he was a medicine person. He passed away last month. He was someone very dear to me, an adopted grandfather, and someone who was really the person who guided this group, the Cherokee Medicine Keepers, from his position of being a spiritual leader for our people. And he says, and this was back probably in the early stages of their formation, we have to do something to honor the spirit of this land. And that really acts as a foundation for the work that the Medicine Keepers do, given the fact that we are not in our traditional homelands, but we are relocated and now live on the homelands of Osage people, Quapaw people, Caddo people. But our obligations as Indigenous people is to caretake, again, to use this frame of caretaking and to protect the land that we reside on now. So next slide. So this is the, just to give you a geographical sense and also an ecoregion sense of where our homelands were in the southeast and what is now known as North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, northern Georgia, and surrounding states in the southern Appalachians, compared to where our lands are today, at least those who are Cherokee Nation citizens and citizens of the United Keetoowah Band. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians resides in the homelands in North Carolina, and many people still maintain relationships, both on a formal governmental level, but also on an interpersonal and familial level. So the image that you see in black and white is a map of the Cherokee Nation Reservation. The light gray represents lands that were once entirely under Cherokee, whatever you want to call it, jurisdiction, control. The darker areas represent the lands that the tribe now has formal jurisdiction or control over, those tribal trust lands. And so that image is just meaning to convey the stark difference in what we once were able to caretake and what has been left as a result of the allotment policy around the turn of the last century, and that's about 98% land loss or theft. So in this framework, we are working today to struggle to enact our relational responsibilities to caretake land amid quite a drastic scenario of what we can call checkerboarded lands, so lands that have been fragmented, so to speak, by colonialism, but also by ongoing acts of dispossession and even ecological fragmentation when it comes to land use patterns and land use practices. Next slide. So in that context, again, thinking through the words of the elders who I work closely with, this is Gary Van, one of our medicine keepers, and he says, "We were always told you come from the land and everything you need comes from the land. It's your fault if you go hungry." So it sounds harsh, but let's focus on that first part. That's the spirit behind what he's saying, and think of it, his elders, his parents and grandparents were telling him, you're a part of the land, everything you need, everything you could ever have a want for comes from the land itself. That connection is paramount. And so if you don't honor that connection, then it is, in fact, your fault if you go hungry. It's kind of harsh, but it's a lesson in itself. And that was, again, kind of providing a springboard for us to go into the curriculum development phase of designing a program that was intended for Cherokee younger people, to work very closely with the medicine keepers, to work with our tribal natural resource management staff, and then also to work with me as a professor working on a community-based research program with 3 rural communities in Oklahoma. So next slide, please. This was the curriculum development workshop, or part of it. And when somebody says curriculum development, you tend to think of like a 4-walled room with fluorescent lights and notepads and PowerPoint slides. This was our curriculum development workshop, and it was very important to the elders here. In the center, Phyllis Edwards, and then on the other side, I can't see what you're seeing, Elder Bonnie Kirk, seated around a fire and talking about, what is it they wanted this program to represent? What was the spirit of it that they wanted to convey to the students who would pass through this program, which was designed to be 3 years in length and duration. But COVID happened, so the students stuck around for 5 years. Started in 2018. This was the fall of the previous year. Next slide. And these were the guiding principles that they came up with that really helped to, again, pave the way for the work that we would continue to do over the next 5 years. And they hit on a lot of what Wendy's already touched on. The first one, most significantly, Ni God, goose, di da da da. We are all related. And of course, that doesn't just mean as Cherokee people or people within a family. It means all people, and it means all people and other than human beings. So an expansive notion of relationality. Squayoha ga, show me. So a way of understanding teaching, as we would say in the English language, that is non-hierarchical and also experiential. So you're doing something and you're showing somebody how to do it. Skinogi ga weska, communalism and interdependence. If we work together, we'll get somewhere. So implying that there is a future, implying futurity, and implying working together and appreciating the strengths that people bring as individuals, but also the power of the collective. And then lastly, Ali Heliji Dasti, having fun, which is perhaps even the most radical one of all of those, you know. And I'm kind of riffing off of Connor Ryan, who's a Lakota professional skier, who says, what's more radical than in Native people experiencing joy on the land? Joy, fun, laughter, good times, that is really the core of this program. And so I have some images, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to maybe save those for later. But we spend a lot of time, actually, if you can advance one more slide, I think it's important to show that one. That's our Elder Crosland Smith seated, and he helped us kick the program off. This was summer of 2018, and he, you might see everybody's kind of got wet heads, but he performed a water treatment ceremony for us to help everybody start this program off on a good foot. I think that's how you say it. Next slide, real quickly. There we go. So this is the place, or at least a portion of the place, where we carry out this program. And in the Cherokee language, the elders have called it Nawatohi Adana Woti'i, the peaceful place of medicine. And we've been fortunate to carry out our work there. It's about 810, close to 900 acres actually now more recently, of land in eastern Adair County. That is a part of those trust parcels that we've managed to hang on to, but was recently designated by the Cherokee Nation as the first ever, at least in modern history, preserve or tribal conservation area that is specifically designated for cultural practices like what we do with the education program. And so there's a lot more that I could say, but I'll stop right there in the interest of our conversation, and to just be grateful to engage with both of my friends here. So, thank you.
I was delighted when I saw that the name was Everything is Connected. Because a Dakota primary tenet is Mitakuye Oasin, which is everything is connected. And it is not just, it is, oh, she told me. This is where I tell you have the brain injury. Thank you. I'm bouncing around a little bit here, and I blame them. I was taught that Mitakuye Oasin was not just about people. And it was not just about people and animals. It was not just about people, animals, plants. It was also about ideas, thoughts. What you think has an impact on everything else. So that's something. I have more in the introduction, but I'm already bouncing around, so I'm just going with that. Toke Yahune. I said that terribly. I studied the language here at the University of Minnesota. I studied as much as I could. When I finished, I was dreaming in Dakota, which is one of my happiest mornings in my life. But my life has gone a different way. and my ability to speak the language is gone. Some words sometimes comes back to me. I am a child of a mission school, Catholic mission school survivor on Crow Creek. I wasn't close to Sisseton, and it changed her for sure. Helped make us end up in Red Wing, Minnesota. In the time I grew up there, it was a very Washichu white town. They seem to, in the last few years, actually noticed that there's a reservation, hop, skip, and a jump. It's actually in the Red Wing boundary because there's a nuclear power plant that they wanted the taxes from. And they're doing things. And for me, it's very exciting to see on Facebook what they're doing. But it also makes me very angry because how different my childhood would have been. Were my being Dakota recognized? I mean, 5th grade, Geronimo comes up in the class and the boys do the dance around my desk. So mostly it was just, do white, you'll be fine here. Never spoken, but quite clear for both my mother and I. Okay, that's enough monobiography. But I think that's important to know that a lot of us are boarding school next generation survivors. And it has a huge impact on our communities, ourselves, our families, the stories I could tell. I was a women's studies teacher before there was a major. I became a media productor. Words go whack for me sometimes. Sometimes it's funny. Then, at nearing the end of my career, it became clear that what I really was a predator, which was a term that was tossed around in the media world because the media world had changed so much that people who did one thing had to do something else to keep going. So I had to learn editing fairly well. And then I got a phone call from the Minnesota Historical Society. Would you like to do a room? And I had constantly, since starting doing video, had felt trapped by the linear quality of the art and the control of the art. You pick what people see and it goes not really if you're doing it fun, but but very linear. And that's not the way Indigenous people think, are, communicate. So doing a room really sounded like heaven. And it was. I did an installation, a large installation called Cloudy Waters, Dakota Reflections on the River. And they were great. They had budgets. There was a 12-foot pond in the middle of the room, built there. It was amazing. We had boulders around it. And there was a primary video that was projected from the ceiling. And that rotated. That was so cool. And then there was other things connected to Dakota history, Dakota life. We had one directional speaker that just over and over provided the names of those who were hanged in Mankato in 1862. There were trees behind a veil. They were naked trees. And I like to say to Dan Spock, who made that happen over there, that he actually ruined my life because I never wanted to do anything else. Going back to doing documentaries was not exactly my idea of a good time anymore. I liked that people could walk into the room, choose what they were going to look at, choose what they were going to hear, choose what they'd remember, which is much more a native way of teaching and learning. And no plaques, you know, museums, they tell you what you're looking at. They tell you everything about what you should know about what this is. We had none of that because an elder said, don't have things on the wall. We're an oral people. And they let that happen too. So trust me, a lot of Dakota people have had different relationships with the Minnesota Historical Society, but for some reason that brought a lot of things together very well. Yeah, so going back a ways, I did video in health, art, history, that sort of thing. But all of that led me to knowing that place is what it was about, that all of it was about. Our place. So relationship to place, both for the new people and the not, led to, oh, I guess I have been busy through the years. There's a piece on the web that you can see called the Bedote Memory Map. And for me, it was a way for people to express how this place, this metro area, was for them as Native people, but also a way for non-Natives to deepen their relationship with this place. Maybe just develop it. Because I don't know, I grew up in the see the USA in your Chevrolet kind of notion of place. And a sense that if you're still living where you grew up when you're 30 years old, there's something wrong with you. So to connect to the place was really important for me, for people to get across to them. Although I'd really like another place in the winter. And the place work became focused on the river. Very quickly, I will tell you that I'm on the board now of Owamni Yomni Okodayapi. And that is right at St. Anthony Falls, Owamni. You were there.
Yeah.
And there is now a nonprofit. It has a very interesting history of some white men with some power coming together, knowing that the locks right at that place were something was going to happen with them because they weren't being used, and what was going to happen. And it has evolved through them inviting Native people, Native person, not me, to get involved and to find out that everything they were thinking about how they should be working and what should be their goal was entirely different. And it is now a place that is Indigenous led. It's being designed for Natives and non-Natives to learn to be. I was taught a long time ago in a little video from an elder I don't remember if it might have been for the Bedote Memory Map, but interviewing an elder about the place, and he said, it is a place of learning, a place of gathering. And so they heard those words, and that's what they're trying to make this small space right down there in Mill City. Because Minneapolis has largely, especially on the riverfront, only talked about industrial. And things are changing. Things are changing. Oh, make me stop. Huh? Questions? Can we just go to them questions? Everybody's questions. I have some, but I'll get them in there. I'm pleased to be here. You're so polite, you people. Piranha.
Audience has any questions?
Your mic's.
Hello? Hello?
Thank you for your presentations today. I appreciate it. I want to ask maybe a difficult question to formulate for me, but it's one that I'm quite curious about. And it relates to what I take from both Wendy and Clint as a kind of critique of Western thinking and Western civilization. I'm wondering, particularly on your slide, Wendy, where you had the circle of the traditional knowledge at the center and the other kinds of knowledge around it, you mentioned at one point that these were two different ways of seeing the world, but I'm wondering if they aren't actually hierarchical, and that the traditional or spiritual way of seeing the world is a higher order and perhaps a more important way of seeing the world that Western civilization has long since forgotten or neglected in its materialist outlook of the world. So I don't know if that's a question, but I'm wondering, first of all, if you see that as hierarchical, and secondly, if it were possible for us to adopt that spiritual or traditional way of knowing, you both called it the traditional way, but I don't know if that's identical with the spiritual way of knowing, or rather than the kind of mechanistic view that prevails in most Western thinking. If it is hierarchical or not for you, and if it is hierarchical and the spiritual is a higher form of knowledge or understanding about reality than the mechanistic view, is it possible for us to adopt that spiritual view? And if we did fully, rather than seeing it as two separate ways of looking at the world, but we saw it as one way of looking at the world, which was a spiritual way, what could that do to repair the world? Because it seems to me that, at least from my point of view, much of what's wrong with Western civilization is its spiritual failures. It's a lack of spirituality that is rooted both in traditional practices and in a story of creation and a story of I guess what you're talking about, also the kind of wisdom that we gain from the land. If that makes any sense, I would love to hear your responses.
I can try. So when I talk about the two knowledge systems, so in my classes, I teach it in several classes, and we work in a colonized space. And moving through academia, learning the hierarchy that Western science is up here and everything else is not real. So I try to strip that hierarchy away. And I talk about it like these are multiple knowledge systems. We have 5,000 cultures, many subcultures, but we don't acknowledge them. And what kind of scientist are we when we don't acknowledge other knowledge systems? What kind of science are we doing, right? So I try to strip that away and not talk about hierarchy, just multiple knowledge systems. And because I don't think we see ourselves that way, right? Okay, spirituality. I talk about our spiritual connection to place. When we go out and harvest, we have a connection to that spruce tree giving us roots, and we thank it, right? But in our colonized space where we teach, spirituality is religion, and we're not talking about that. So I don't dive deep into that, because that's a whole other semester of talking about how do we define spirituality across cultures. So other than acknowledging that we are not talking about religion and Christianity, it's something completely different. And so that's how I deal with those two things. You said something else, I can't remember what it was. I don't, I'm doing a cycle thing in my head too. But I try to just remove the norms of what hierarchy is and spirituality is. Because if we get stuck on that, and those are things to get stuck on, right? We miss the point of what we're doing, of looking how everything is connected. Western science is allowing us to look at pieces with tools that we don't have in traditional knowledge. And traditional knowledge is telling us the history of place and the impacts on environment and human beings. And that's how I try to tie those together. What you got?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, dismantling hierarchies is more, it feels better and it's more in line with the teachings that go into this work. You know, my knee-jerk is to say, well, it's more about balance. Because I mentioned that we work in the program, the Cherokee Environmental Leadership Program, we work with our tribal natural resource managers who have been trained in Western sciences. And so it's kind of a when appropriate, we draw upon that perspective. Even though they're Cherokee scientists who you know, are botanists and biologists. So, you know, sometimes it can be useful, but to your point about the spirit or the lack thereof, from that perspective, you know, it's something that we draw upon and have drawn upon very intentionally. You know, with his passing recently, we'll have to learn from what he's left behind and the teachings that, fortunately, so Crosland Smith, you saw an image of him seated, and I mentioned his quote at the very beginning as kind of a guiding foundation for what we do. He's been very influential, and I was very humbled and privileged to work with him on 3 books that he wanted out in the world. And they're short books. They're actually on Amazon. If you just search Crosland Smith, if you're interested. These 3 books are about his perspective as a Cherokee, as a Katua person, which is our traditional name for ourselves. But he made a very, very intentional choice and requested that I help him with it to provide this knowledge and this spiritual understanding of the world that he was taught from his, you know, elders. He grew up in the ceremonial grounds and the ceremonial society. Wanted it available to all people. He said that was the actual intent of it in the first place. Katua people have been caretakers of it. And so it's really marks the first time that this knowledge was made available outside of the ceremonial ground, and otherwise outside of just, you know, personal conversations that he may have had with others. So I say all that because the first book that he published is called Stand as One. And even from the beginning of the formation of the Medicine Keepers, who I see as all elders, and I did at that time, but it was funny, in 2008 when they formed, the story of how they came together was we would kind of set things up outside. We had a fire, we had food available, lots of coffee. I was just hoping that people would come. People started showing up and talking, but they were at one point when we started the meeting, they were looking around for the elder to kind of give them the blessing to continue with the meeting. And here I am thinking, well, everyone here is an elder. Crosland shows up late because he's trying to find the place. He and his wife and his son finally pull up into the space. And that marked a moment of endorsement, if you will, a sense of what we're doing is okay, talking about the medicines, talking about plants and the land. And one thing that he gave them from the very beginning was a concept, galakti igati ha. We are to be all equal in a divine way. So that's coming full circle around to balance, equality, as opposed to hierarchy. So I think if we just proceed with those kind of foundational teachings of how we organize, how we conduct ourselves in relation to one another, stand as one doesn't mean all Cherokee people stand as one. It means all people stand as one. So that kind of sense of balance and understanding of relatedness is a way of, to me at least, filtered through the question that you just asked, acknowledging that there is a time and a place for different types of knowledges. Mm-hmm. So Wendy mentioned two-eyed seeing. That's one way of talking about that. But I think, there are other ways of knowing as well out there in the world that we ought to listen to. And I think that what's missing is also the spirit behind them. So that seems very vague, I think, and very general. I think it manifests in the place-based relationships that we've been talking about. And that's really, to me, like what's important to take away from the bigger kind of esoteric conversation around knowledge systems. And for example, the valuing or celebration of indigenous knowledge systems is easy to kind of float up like a helium balloon out of the stratosphere and not leave us with any actionable things to do. And so I think honoring and supporting and funding and assisting place-based programs, whether they be indigenous ones, whether they be attempts to connect to place from our other relatives who are marginalized within this country, and finding areas of, avenues of solidarity to do that work. That's really where the rubber hits the road for me, and it tends to kind of get overlooked. So these types, and Mona, you mentioned it over and again, connection to place is paramount. I think that kind of proliferation of place-based work is kind of what we're in this for, in addition to talking about the ways that science commits violence against marginalized knowledge systems.
I would suggest that one of the solution, I have to be told and listen. I would suggest that one huge step for this vision that I'm seeing in the speech is if science took the time to redefine itself. It's got so many walls and rules and borders, and science needs to actually look at its own history and its own sense and envision a different future with different definitions of what science is. I get really tired of ethnobotany and like that. It's botany. Indian history, it's American history. We have to stop breaking things into little bitty silos. I'm saying that at a university. And there was one other thing, but I forgot. It'll come back.
Actually, I remember the last part of what I was going to say to you. You were talking about the destruction of the environment. And we have to redefine or think about economic drivers, right? And what is considered successful and wealthy. My tribal community, we fall behind the national poverty. But if you looked in everyone's freezers, we live off the land. 80% of the diet is off the land and ocean. Halibut, king crab, Dungeness crab, shrimp, you name it, there's millions of dollars of food, right? So you can go get what you need, and that's our wealth, right? That's how we see that. But then we step out.
It's not recognized as that.
Yeah, and then we step out and into mainstream, and it's consume. We have to have more than. And I often contemplate this and wonder if it's a disconnection from culture, a disconnection from environment. When we have that connection to place, an example is, let me see if I don't get lost in what I'm saying. A couple years ago, I was able to find my great-great-great-grandfather's village. And I found his mortuary pole and his gravesite. And we just sat there because the people that were there shed skin when they were there. And the trees took that DNA up. So their spirit is there still. And so I'm connected to that place through my family, okay? But how do we then justify the economic driver part of harvesting those trees? And the have and have not. We have our culture. It grounds us in who we are. And I can say that as I stepped out and went into academia, I left my culture for 18 years. And I came back. And our country, this country, is a country of people who gave up their language willingly, who gave up their culture, and then came here and stripped it away from the ones who did not voluntarily give it up. So there's no thought of being connected to place. Others were forced here, right? So I think how do we balance that? Is there a lack of cultural attachment because there's something missing? I think that's the soul of who we are. But all of that connection to place, economic drivers, defines how we interact with the environment and what we allow to happen on our lands.
Thank you all. We have a few questions that have been submitted through Slido. One of them says, can you speak to how non-Indigenous educators can begin to dismantle hierarchies of knowledge and expose their students to two-eye seeing in ways that are appropriate and not appropriative?
Bring a cultural practitioner into your classroom. Recognize that our knowledge bearers, they don't have to go through a Western hierarchy and get a PhD or master's degree. They know. They know. So we have to validate their knowledge too. Bring them in the classroom. That gives you authentic voice, right? That's our place to talk about. And we do it together.
There's only one problem with that here. There's a lot of class.
Microphone, please. Thank you.
This is ticking me off. There's a lot of classrooms that need this, and there has been a change in tiny baby step change in attitude, so that there's a desire. There aren't enough knowledge keepers, elders. So there are some other ways. One would be the Bedote tour through the Minnesota Humanities, and a couple of other folks offer them also. And it takes them to places of power with Dakota people, Ramona and Ethan, providing information on the history and language considered, and then teachers take their students there and they're offered ways to learn how to do that. Because of course they're nervous. I'm not Native, how can I do this right? So they're given there's another workshop they can go to learn about that. But I used to be part of that because I made the Bedote memory map. And it was amazing how people's lives changed from finding out that this space that they were in a picnic in is a sacred place to Dakota people. That the falls is something other than a place where the lumber industry could grow. And so that's some ways. It's a version of that works a little better when there aren't enough folks.
Thank you all. Again, we have a lot more questions on Slido. You have all talked about place and connection to place. Could you say more about the challenges of this and the possibilities that are made possible by being connected to place?
Go ahead, I already just talked about it.
Okay, my turn. Well, I can talk about it from just through the lens of the work that I do. And I mentioned it at the very beginning with the quote by Crosland. We have to do something to honor the spirit of this land. And looking at the long history of Cherokee people and our relationship to what is now northeastern Oklahoma, the Cherokee Reservation, that sense of displacement is so profound and marked in our history and in our bodies and in our families in connection to land. And yet there is still this founding or kind of grounding principle that we have that we work from. And so I see it as a way of understanding relationality as, what you mentioned, Wendy, as a relational continuity, and that even with this profound displacement, there are still connections and there are still obligations. And so that to me speaks a lot, not only for Cherokee people, but for the many, many other Native people who find themselves on reservations or in communities miles and miles away from their homelands. And you don't see this manifest in, oh, well, it's not our land, so we don't really care. There's still this continuity of relationship to place. And so what that tells me is that it's, I don't want to say it's in our DNA, but it's something that is, we have carried through the generations and can serve as a model for teaching what it means to be connected to place, what are the responsibilities you have to land, and how does viewing yourself in relationship to land in that way fundamentally change your understanding. And so even back to what Mona was saying, this sense of placelessness, or at least a mobility that is carefree and not connected. It doesn't mean that Native people don't move. It doesn't mean that Cherokee people don't live in all parts of the world, or other Native people for that matter. But it does mean that there is a sense of understanding about your responsibilities and obligations to place, which is at the core of, I mean, there's a lot of cynicism around land acknowledgements, especially when they're uttered by institutions. But that's at the core, and I'm reminded, and I remind myself constantly, and I like to remind people that land acknowledgements are actually indigenous things. Mm-hmm. When you visit someone else's territory, you acknowledge that you're in someone else's homeland. Of course, when they're elevated to the status of institutions, that can be kind of just, lip.
And you ask, for example, here,
Microphone,
you ask,
please.
are there any...
Oh.
There's a hole.
You
in
could
the
just leave it
roof.
on. Mona, you can just leave it on. You don't have to turn it off.
Oh, okay. I just don't want people to hear me burp. Where was I?
Land acknowledgements and other things.
Yeah. In a Native way, you ask, for example, here, you would ask, are there Dakota people here? And it's very significant when you find out there aren't any. So there's a moment in land acknowledgement that is covered in a way that it isn't covered in general land acknowledgements. And it should always end with action or promises.
Thank you. Somebody posted, I am curious about the work you do that bridges to printing and publishing. I am curious if you could both speak more to the bridging, responsibility, and experiences that has come with that.
To publishing our work, is that what you're talking about?
Printing and publishing your work? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I'll try to answer that. So my science research is on tribal lands and guided by elders. And there was agreements made to publish under a Haida name the sites so that people don't come there because we don't want people destroying the sites. So when I publish the science, the geoscience, geochemistry part, I put it under a Haida name and I don't show the exact location as a agreement with the elders. Those elders have passed on, but that agreement still stands. And then on the education, the geoscience education, education equity, knowledge system work that I do with my community, they get to read the paper first before it's submitted and comment on it. So it's always back to them because I'm publishing about my community. And I only publish about my community because I don't have the right to speak about other communities. That's not my place. So I always provide that to someone to look at and say, you know, maybe change this or don't put this in here. That's not a normal academic way of doing things. We're just going to publish it to get our name out there. But the work I do in that education equity is not the main part of my career. And it wasn't going to be the main part of my career. And I have most of my publications around that now because I think I've done this work 15, 16 years, and it's only been the last couple of years I started publishing. And that was because people were taking pictures of my slides and trying to publish it. And I just happened to be an editor that they sent it to. So that was a little shocking. That happened a couple times, so I finally put out the model and put out other things so people can use it. But I don't know, I guess that's how I'm always trying to go back to community and get permissions to put stuff out before it goes out or before it's talked about. I guess, if that's what you're asking, I guess that's the way I do both of those.
I think that I would resonate with that because, well, first of all, I really appreciated your comments at the very beginning, Wendy, about academia and the kind of grind that it commits on human beings, but certainly folks who are trying to maintain a connection and I would say a commitment to community while being in this space. And so I found your words to be really, well, I resonated with them because that's also my approach, and I would say our collectively within our Department of Ethnic Studies, that's kind of acknowledging that you know, within that field, which is often misconstrued as just being concerned with quote-unquote identity politics, but it's a radically intersectional and interdisciplinary space, and we conduct ourselves in that same way of acknowledging our relationships to one another and our, you know, four kind of pillar disciplines, if you will: Native studies, Africana studies, Asian American studies, and Chicanx, Latinx studies. And that's the culture we try to create, is understanding our place in this institution that is a machine and can grind you if you let it. So with that, I would just say that and related to how you just put it, Wendy, oftentimes we find ourselves doing both. You know, what are the things that I can work and use my resources and skills and connections to create something that is for the community. And oftentimes that's in addition to the work that you need to do to make tenure, to you know, survive and ensure longevity for those students who you're working with, and also trying to mentor through that process. And so we have to just hold all of that at once. But that's a part of the work. And I haven't found any answer to that other than that's just the way we have to do it. There's really no, and I think that's the whole point, is that we do it because of that commitment, despite the fact that not often is it acknowledged as an output, so to speak, on your annual review or your tenure dossier. Anyway, so that is alluding to the books that I mentioned. That I'm not trying to be a salesperson here, but you can find them on the web, believe it or not. But they are, you know, a labor of love that I was asked by an elder to help publish his books, and I helped navigate that process and put things together in a way that, of course, you know, he reviewed and he has his family now has the copyright to those books, and so. That was one of those things where you do it in addition to the other things because it's important, because it shows a commitment to community, and because it's on behalf of future generations that would benefit from that. So I know we're running short on time, do we?
Right.
I would just like to add that
Microphone, please.
I did leave it on.
It's the last time.
It can't pick up. Years ago, years and years and years ago, there were Dakota people who were fighting about which community, which whatever, which threesome had the real Genesis story. And an older guy in the room said, no, you don't understand that. That story is about how we became who we are in that place. That comes back to me a lot. For one thing, it was great because it eliminated arguments in my mind and trying to figure out the real one. But it's also for non-natives. I think non-natives should write their own Genesis story of how you got to be here on Dakota land. And what does that mean for you?